With the new expansion for Alliance released, the game finally has its first set of elite stages. Having levels where you have max star upgrades is really nice. The hero spell upgrades in particular are fun to play around. You can put a lot of depth into your tactics now that you have everything at your disposal. It's more fun to use everything working together all at once, rather than to have a fraction of your power against weaker enemies. So any expansion at all should help with the replay value of Alliance. But let's go over what this update in particular does for the game and see where Alliance stands now. The enemies this time around are pretty cool. They have lots of abilities that make them more memorable and require you to play around those skills. It's not something you generally want to ignore. Armor definitely matters a lot more here than magic resistance, so once again, it feels like each area only favors either archers or mages as your one type of damaging tower. Though in this case, you do still get more value out of other tower types than in the campaign. It's just that you hardly do more than still spam a tower type even on these elite stages. Also, it feels like these enemies are 90% Halloween and only 10% elves. The Origins representation in Alliance always feels like it's less than what it should be. But we got a good boss that calls back to Origins in a fun way. It helps that he's finally not heavily underpowered either, so even with an optimal defense, he can still get a decent way towards the exit before dying. The new mechanic is cool in concept because you have a double-edged sword of a mechanic with the Weirdwoods and Warden Barracks being able to be possessed by specters, but in execution, I think it's flawed. The Weirdwoods are pre-built, and the Warden Barracks only stand to benefit the player if they invest gold into them. So rather than being a double-edged sword to invest in, they are a double-edged sword just for existing. There isn't much depth of thought to put into spending gold on these towers or playing around them. It's basically like having a positive thing on the battlefield that happens to occupy the same space as a separate, unrelated environmental hazard. The other mechanics that the boss uses are some random tower blocking skills that encourage you to use multiple sacrificial low-level towers, which is admittedly different from the game balance promoting tier 4 tower spam. But the way you counter this campaign is the exact same as how you counter everything difficult in Alliance, blocking enemies at the entrance. Whether it's preventing specters from haunting the environmental features, stopping Deathwoods from using their much deadlier ranged attack, or keeping either of the two enemy spawners from using their abilities, you win the hardest by putting units at the entrance. And since you can't be in so many places at once with just your reinforcements, it solidifies the heroes who best support this playstyle as the strongest ones. So just like the campaign, this expansion makes towers take a back seat to what your heroes and spells can do. The most impactful that towers ever get to be is when there are strategic points at the entrance so that they can help support your heroes. All that being said, it is still satisfying to fight these enemies. Watching Raylan use Brutal Slash on tanky enemies or seeing hero spells deal area damage to enemy formations is pure, perfectly good dopamine. It's for this reason that I don't think that the criticisms I just gave to the expansion are a very big deal. I just think that being encouraged to use different strategies in order to bring out the strengths of the less powerful towers could be even better. Compare this to how Frontiers made mages and assassins more useful in its two biggest expansions. And while nerfing the mecha, it didn't make that tower completely obsolete there either. The meta hardly changes in this expansion though. At most, rocket gunners stand out here for being able to shoot while the tower is disabled. Otherwise, you still just want to use your heroes to deal with the enemies and then support them with the towers that you just happen to feel like using. Still, I do want to shout out how the rocket gunners stand out in this campaign. To me, Alliance is at its best when the mechanics of enemies are organically countered by the unique traits of towers. The Overseer having multiple hitboxes so that it takes full damage from chain attacks has been my go-to example since release. But now I can also point out rocket gunners for being able to ignore getting disabled, similar to the battle mecha. There's also a case to be made for the Twilight Longbows being able to circumvent the Dust Cryptid mechanic by having such a slow attack rate that the cloud already dissipates by the time they fire. But that logic falls apart as soon as you have a second source of damage to hit the enemies, as it will desync the timings all over again. So I can only really say this about one tower, but at least it's a very good and organic interaction. It doesn't feel as samey as just spawning units at the entrance to counter everything else. What this update does for future fans of Alliance who may play the game for the first time later is rebalance the towers, heroes, and star upgrades. I don't think this is the end of balance changes, and I certainly hope it's not, because right now, it's not too difficult to rank the towers and heroes. But I am glad that the Elven Stargazer got made a little cheaper and has less RNG to its attacks, even if it's not enough and it's still the weakest tower. I'm glad that Brewmasters have a stronger debuff and a faster attack rate, as well as a faster respawn time on Halfdan, even if this tower still falls short of the Tricannon. I'm glad that an attempt was made to make the Tricannon's abilities no longer have anti-synergy, and to make the basic attack stronger, even if it still feels bad at lower levels. I'm especially glad for the buffs to Taurus and Grimsun, as well as the fixes to Grimsun and Broden. I like the idea of buffing bosses, though health and speed are their main problem, not damage. Most importantly though, I think that rebalancing favorite customer to be a guaranteed discount at tier 3 of an upgrade was a really smart way to make tower upgrades feel better to use. The old upgrade will not be missed. Overall, I still stand by the idea that Alliance is in good hands. Fans are still waiting for the encyclopedia, skippable cutscenes, and so on. But several of the things that were on this list are now checked off thanks to this update. They're making progress in the right direction. That's why my opinion is best summed up by the phrase, so far, so good. As we keep getting more updates, the complaints about Alliance should keep getting smaller and less severe. And if not, then we'll just mod the game until they do.